Grab a cup of joe, buckle up, and let's embark on a journey of self-discovery, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Let's get rolling.
Welcome to this episode of Rhythm of the Road podcast. I think you've noticed something a little bit different, and if you haven't, it's probably because you're not watching on YouTube. So if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeartRadio or any of those spaces, make sure you hop over to the YouTube channel, Rhythm of the Road podcast, and you can watch and you can see we're in a different space. It even sounds very different in here. And this is the perfect example of how I'm going to explain why transition is hard. You know, we talk about transition from when you were a little kid all the way right up until your last day. It's always a transition. I've been obviously going through a transition in here. I've completely moved spaces across to my house, moved this whole studio into a little bit smaller room, not a little, a lot smaller. And so I'm trying to re-navigate and reconfigure and rebuild this space. But also in that time, try to think about how do I make it better? How do I improve it? How do I set myself up for more creative opportunities? How do I set myself up to be more inspired as I'm doing these things? And in that, there's still the actual physical act of having to do the move and think about and plan and have transition moments. And something that I really discovered was the fact that it's really just uncomfortable. And maybe it's not going to go the way you thought it was, or the plan you had laid out was just got derailed, or you had to pivot, or you did something different, or you came up with a better solution or a better option. I think I relayed out this physical space like 8 or 9 times before I even landed, so that I knew that I wasn't going to move anything, right? And the only pieces that you're seeing are the pieces that are yet to be put in their places where they want to be. You can still see some bins sitting here. Obviously, there's nothing on the walls yet. So as that transition continues to happen, hopefully you see this room transform into the creative, inspiring space that I'm looking for it to be. What makes transition so hard? Is it because we're going into them thinking like it's going to go perfect? Or are we going into them because we're trying to think about the fact that we might be losing something, but we forget that we're also gaining something? And so I think for me in this transition, that was the one big thing I had to get through my headspace, was just I'm losing something in a space that I've had well over a decade, and took me at least 5 years to build and get the way I wanted it, so that it felt like that space. And the physical space is there, but how it looks and feels now is completely different because it's serving a completely different purpose. And same thing with this room, this space that I'm in now served a completely different purpose 2 weeks ago. And now it serves this purpose. And so rebuilding that. And this transition time has just kind of been a challenge because of not knowing how it's going to look and feel, not really going the way I wanted to. And what does that mean? It didn't go the way I wanted it to because it didn't just happen like fast and efficient, because there were life things that came up that didn't necessarily allow that to happen. I had other things going on. And so like typically in our home, or when we're doing projects, we'll do them in the evening, and we can kind of like chunk it up a little bit and break it up so that it happens over time. But we weren't able to do that this time. It was like legitimately we can only do a project on the weekends. And so it spread it out a little longer than I anticipated, a little way longer than I would have liked. However, that was really just my uncomfortability. That doesn't mean that it necessarily affected those in our house or those that we're working with, or I know it affected some folks that I work with because they're waiting for some things that I just physically couldn't even do without having this set up all ready to go. So that made it hard for me. And I know that, and I can know that, but it doesn't have to be something negative or a heavy weight I put on myself. I can know it and acknowledge it and name it and say, yep, this is hard. It's still not done. So it still makes me a little bit uncomfortable. However, I know it's coming together. I can see an end. I've been working on projects for like the last 9 months in terms of construction and remodel and all those kinds of things in our home. So this is kind of the final culmination of all of those pieces. So talk about a year of transition just in our physical space and the makeup of what our home looks like and how we're using space and how we're using different rooms. Like, it's just been constant transition for me. And I think this final piece, why it's making it so hard, is one, it's my creative space and the space I do so many amazing things in. And it's at the end of the line of all of the other things that started way back earlier this year. And so it's kind of all of those things. And the one thing that I have learned through it and grateful for is the fact that I can just name it and know it. And that doesn't make it all go away. It doesn't make me feel like I'm, out smelling roses and everything's wonderful and amazing. But it does mean I can just name it, call it what it is. And I can be like, yep, this is just a moment where I'm going to feel that for a second. And then I'm going to move on, at least with my day. It's not going to interrupt or disrupt my entire day and being. Although I know for some people, transitions like this can be that. And so for folks that maybe transitions even harder and it takes a little longer to get through those, is know that it might just take you a little longer. There's not a timeline or a time frame for you to how you're going to interpret internally what transition feels like to you. So as you're thinking about it, as you're thinking about transition, don't worry about like the how do I feel or how frustrated am I getting, unless it's affecting other folks or you're being frustrated or angry with other people. Maybe assess why that anger or what is actually bubbling up for you in that, and just know that, maybe that's just you holding that. That's not everybody else holding that. So hopefully you're okay with this in transition view for this transition type episode. So if it was a little hard for you to watch because it's way different than what many of you are used to seeing, I promise as we continue to go here, it is going to look different. It will transform, and hopefully it's back to a view where you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely a space that Jeremy would want. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please do me a favor, leave a review, leave a comment on this video. What is it like for you to go through transition? Or maybe what are some tips that you give yourself or your other people in your space to go through transition? Because I think I'm going to put that as a topic or an idea for a future episode, is maybe what are some of those hard, like defined things that I use in terms of, let's call them tips and tricks. Not that I like that language, but that's what it is. And that's what gets us more views and more folks come into these videos. So thank you. I appreciate all of you that continue to watch and continue to support, and I'll see you down the road.
Thanks for cruising with me on this episode of Rhythm of the Road. Remember, the journey itself is the destination. Until next time, keep the rhythm flowing, and we'll see you down the road.